In the heartland, the harvest of America's storied waves of grain rolls on. In Washington, a government doggedly develops domestic policy amid a climate of war. And in the country, rural communities employ new technology to service their oldest residents.
Yep, thank you.
Those stories and more next.
Major funding for Market to Market is provided by Deere & Company on behalf of John Deere dealers. And
this program made possible in part by Pioneer Hybrid to help America's growers become more market-wise, because high yields plus sound marketing skills help our customers succeed.
And by this and other public television stations. Partial funding is provided by the Central Educational Network.
This is the Friday, September 21 edition of Market to Market, the weekly journal of rural America.
Hello, I'm Mark Pearson. After last week's layoff in the wake of the tragedy blocks away at the World Trade Center, New York-based stock markets opened Monday and began a week-long sell-off. The uncertainty provoked by the attack exacerbated underlying fundamentals that point to a sharply weakening economy. Many of those weaknesses were identified in the Federal Reserve's quarterly Beige Book report to Congress. Recognizing the gravity of the trend, the Federal Reserve slashed interest rates by a half point, the 8th cut this year. But many on Wall Street are already anticipating another cut before the end of the year. Washington lawmakers are mulling what can be done to restore consumer confidence. Ironically, not much of the talk has lingered on energy policy, but it's not as though it isn't being given any thought. This tanker from Arizona, bound for Ground Zero, was loaded with 100% soy-based diesel fuel in Iowa Thursday. More than 1 million gallons of the clean-burning, non-toxic fuel are used annually by the Phoenix-based Rockland Materials Company. The tanker will accompany trucks to New York to assist in the relief effort. While the alternative fuel costs a bit more than conventional diesel, the company converted its entire fleet of more than 100 vehicles to soy diesel this year. Rockland officials claim its use lessens America's dependency on foreign oil. Indeed, soy diesel could be a partial solution to the nation's energy problem, a dilemma that may well be costing much more than the price at the pump. For its part, the administration is addressing a multifaceted approach to controlling terrorism. The president is creating a new cabinet-level position to address domestic security. Appointed to the new post of Secretary of Homeland Security was Pennsylvania Governor Tom Ridge. In addition to the creation of that post, the government says it will combat terrorism through foreign policy, including the deployment of food aid, and by focusing intelligence gathering on matters of finance, the lifeblood of terrorism. Also this week, in an effort to return American commerce to normal, the government eased off some of the emergency curbs that were imposed last week. On Wednesday, rural airspace was reopened to small planes that operate under visual flight rules. The small private planes, many of which are used by large farms to survey farmland or do aerial spraying, and typically have little contact with air traffic controllers. The planes are, however, still prohibited from flying over major cities. While looking out for the safety of U.S. airspace after the terrorist attack in New York, the U.S. has also learned the prime suspect, Osama bin Laden, has ties to agriculture and has marketed his products to Europe and the U.S. Court testimony in a trial of a previous terrorist attack implicating bin Laden indicates the Middle East terrorist money trail leads to the Blessed Fruits farming business, which raised crops including peanuts, fruit, sunflower, and wheat. The products were run through Cyprus to avoid international sanctions against Sudan and allow for a more profitable sale to the West. Meanwhile, the U.S. is still giving millions of dollars in food aid to developing countries, including Afghanistan, the country allowing residence to bin Laden. Last December, just prior to his inauguration, President-elect Bush told a group of commodity industry officials he would not use food as a weapon in his foreign policy. But there is concern that food aid programs could be employed as one of the subtle tools of retaliatory measures against last Tuesday's terrorist attack in New York City. Much of the food that will be used as a foreign policy tool is currently being harvested. At the beginning of the week, when the USDA took its statistical snapshot, 9% of the U.S. corn crop had been harvested, right on the historical pace. 3% of the nation's soybean acreage had also been harvested, slightly behind the normal pace. More than half the nation's rice crop is out of the field, and 9% of the U.S. cotton crop is headed to the gin. For much of the week, markets were dampened by last week's government harvest projection that suggested crops are larger than many had expected. More on all this in the market segment, so stay tuned.
Fruit rides the rails. For the first time, Washington State apples and pears were loaded onto refrigerated boxcars and shipped by rail to the East Coast. The railroad hasn't been used much to transport fruit in recent years because it is too slow, often taking up to 2 weeks to arrive at its destination. But the fruit-filled boxcars were coupled behind an Amtrak passenger train and are expected to take about 5 days to reach the East Coast.
Sometimes events like last week's attack can initiate unimagined change. Crisis can sometimes provide the political license to make changes to institutions that otherwise are nearly untouchable. For the past 50 years or so, much of the traditional Washington farm lobby has defended expensive farm programs that ostensibly pay farmers to produce no matter the market. They've argued the enormous flow of money to a relative handful of farmers producing a handful of crops was necessary to maintain export share and the nation's food infrastructure. Critics have argued the policy has helped depopulate rural America and degrade the rural environment. This week, the administration was in apparent agreement and began to unveil a view of farm policy that is a dramatic departure from what the country has experienced the past 50 years. The changes already in the offing were unveiled against the backdrop of a worsening economy and the administration's announced intention for a protracted war on terrorism. In a 120-page report, the White House said federal farm subsidies are causing unintended and unwanted consequences by spurring overproduction of crops and driving up cash rents for farmland. Though short on specifics, the report seemed to criticize the distribution of farm subsidies. It noted the nation's 175,000 largest farms had an average household income of more than $135,000.
We have tremendous change sweeping throughout this industry, and we have to pause and take stock of our new operating environment.
At a midweek news conference, Agriculture Secretary Ann Veneman deflected questions about congressional proposals for the next farm bill. She said the administration's report, which reportedly was personally revised and approved by the president, was merely an assessment of existing programs. Among the report's recommendations, the government should help farmers and ranchers when unexpected events beyond their control occur, without causing producers to become dependent on federal support. Congress should pay farmers who take certain conservation measures, such as controlling manure and reducing soil erosion. And more money should be made available for programs to prevent foodborne illnesses and protect crops and livestock from pests.
I think we have to begin asking some very serious questions.
Those suggestions would seem to align the White House more with the thinking of the Democrat-controlled Senate Agriculture Committee, which is yet to draft Farm Bill legislation, than the Republican-controlled House. There, lawmakers have passed a bill that would cost nearly $170 billion over 10 years and would expand subsidy programs for grain and cotton farmers. Members of the European Commission are cheering the Bush administration's apparent change of course on farm policy. Well, that's hardly a surprise, as EU Agriculture Commissioner Franz Fischler says the administration proposals mirror many aspects of EU agro-environmental policy and integration of environmental concerns into farming practice. Stay tuned.
Find the fat. Citing Americans' need to know the fat content of the food they eat, the Bush administration is asking health regulators to finalize a food labeling proposal. The Food and Drug Administration first proposed the labeling in 1999, but it's never been issued. The FDA estimates the revealing the trans fat on food labels would save between 2,000 and 5,600 lives a year if people read and adhere to the labels. The FDA also estimates manufacturers would spend $400 million to relabel or reformulate food.
The attack on the World Trade Center has caused many business firms to consider decentralizing operations. It is certainly feasible. Communications technology, now cost-effective, extends all manner of services to nearly anywhere. A case in point is rural health care. In 1999, it cost an estimated $36 billion to take care of 8 million patients in their home. The cost of home health care includes the travel time of nurses driving from their offices to patients' homes. In rural areas, the travel is more of a challenge. If a patient is having difficulty, it is not so easy for a traveling nurse to reach that patient in a timely fashion. But technology is coming to parts of rural America to help nurses keep tabs on patients between visits without leaving the office. Producer Nancy Crowfoot reports.
Good morning. Are you ready? Okay, I'll connect us.
Deb Zacharias is a home health care nurse in north central Minnesota. She routinely travels to patients' homes to check their overall health.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you this morning? Good.
But on this day, she is checking in by way of a video conference call from her office in Wadena, Minnesota, to a patient in his apartment 35 miles south in the small community of Parker's Prairie. It is a virtual visit where both the nurse and the patient see each other on a television monitor while talking to each other over the telephone. The video quality and overall telecommunication system may not seem as high-tech as many of the systems on the market today, but this particular operation is designed to be low cost and to bring telemedicine home health care to rural and underserved urban areas where high-speed data transmission lines are not always available. With grants and matching funds totaling $1.27 million, the University of Minnesota developed and tested the system. The project manager is Jan Marie Lundgren.
The VIA TV unit that we're using for video conferencing is designed to work with the patient's own telephone and TV set. So it's a little set-top box, and it works with plain old telephone service called POTS lines. This is what's usually available across the country.
For the past 2 years, the university has conducted a demonstration project with 65 patients in 4 Minnesota home health care agencies. 3 of the demonstration projects were in rural areas.
Have you done your oxygen level this morning?
Yeah.
Do you have it there, Joel, so you can put it up to the camera and show it to me?
For Joel Swenson in Parker's Prairie, the virtual visits mean more contact with a nurse. He also monitors his oxygen and blood pressure more often, and the nurse has the ability to take a still photo of the reading. In some cases, tele-home care visits have led to early detection and intervention when a patient became ill.
We've got a couple people who had pneumonia. They went all weekend not feeling well, and we're going to wait till late week for the nurse to come out and see him, and we did a virtual visit on like Monday. They weren't feeling well. You could see they weren't feeling well. Their oxygen level was dropping, so we sent them to the doctor, and they had pneumonia, which got treated as an outpatient instead of having to be in the hospital, which probably 3 days later would have ended up in the hospital.
Avoiding a costly hospital stay for their patients has earned telehome care the seal of approval from the home health care nurses in Wadena. But it was a system that did arrive with some doubts. Not so much whether virtual visits would be beneficial, but concerns that patients with chronic health problems would be willing or capable of using the equipment placed in their homes.
And I am so happy with this program in the respect that we've got 80 and 90-year-olds who are using the virtual visits, and I thought once you got to that age, you would not be interested in technology. I was totally wrong.
Being wrong may be just the right answer the University of Minnesota and its major funding source, the U.S. Department of Commerce, wants to hear as they determine whether technology can improve the delivery of home health care in rural America.
And they are most excited to be able to get an evaluation of how well telemedicine works through plain telephone service, and then to be able to recommend to the government what additional services need to be provided to our rural areas in order to guarantee good health service to all of our citizens.
Today is August 22nd, and we're doing a virtual visit on Esther Krause.
The expansion of good health services through telemedicine communications is already on the minds of those who participated in the demonstration project. Under the guidelines of the demonstration project, only patients with one of 3 specific diseases could participate. So Wadena Home Health and Hospice Program could have just 10 of its 200 patients equipped for virtual visits. Now that the demonstration project is ending, the program in Wadena can not only keep the equipment, but plans to buy a yet undetermined number of additional units to expand use of virtual visits to more patients.
We're going to prioritize. We're going to set up a system as to who needs it, first of all, and who is more seriously ill. I've even thought about taking it into the hospice patient's home towards that last week or so of their lives so that the nurse can monitor when she's at home.
While Winkles and her nursing staff are enthused about the potential of telehome care, they say virtual visits will never completely replace nurses traveling to visit patients in their homes. Nor do they want technology to take priority over hands-on healing.
Yep, thank you. Yep. Bye.
We do blood draws. You can't do that over TV. You can't get the hands-on listening to their lungs. And there's something about being able to touch your patient that nurses like too. It'll never completely take away the nursing visits, because there's things you can do on a personal level you can't on TV, but it'll help. It'll enhance them.
Telehome care visits may enhance the treatment of the patient, and in many cases allow them to stay in the community in which they live. And by staying in their community, they can remain close to their local healthcare providers, which, in the big picture of rural economics, can help keep local physicians and rural hospitals in business. For Market to Market, I'm Nancy Crowfoot.
Next, the Market to Market report.
The Chicago grain markets finished the week mostly down. For the week, wheat prices were down a penny. The September corn contract also closed down a penny, while the new crop December contract closed 7 cents lower. The new crop November soybean contract lost 4 1/4 cents on the week. Soybean meal lost $9.20 a ton. Cotton closed 1.5 cents lower. In livestock, fed cattle futures were $3.30 lower. Feeder cattle finished 91 cents lower. The lean hog contract closed the week $1.32 lower. And for the week, COMEX gold, $16.40 an ounce higher. The euro finished the week 90 basis points lower against the dollar. And the CRB index finished the week down at $196.30. Here now to lend us her insight is one of our regular market analysts, Sue Martin. Sue, good to have you back.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, let's talk about the week that was, and let's talk about this grain market. The harvest is underway. We talked about 9% of the corn crop harvested here in the last few days, and that number is probably going to jump with some decent weather this weekend. What's ahead for the grains?
Well, the grain market, of course, this week, a lot of people would try to say, or analysts would try to accuse it of reacting to the stock market. I don't really think that's the case. I think the grain market was acting on its own merit. We're coming into harvest. It's very seasonal. You lift into about the second week of September, and then you decline in towards October. And that's what we're doing. Now, you're in the backyard of the Chicago Board of Trade, you're hearing harvest starting, and you're starting to hear some yields, and the corn yields are coming a little better than what was previously thought they would be. But we have to get into Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan and Missouri. And so we haven't gotten the harvest really underway yet. So while we did meet some pretty good counts, we had a 6.18% retracement on beans from the 417 low to the 538 high. And we had corn meeting a target on a wave count that we do. And so that's the first count. And then the wheat made its third count. And so we had all three kind of hitting together. And of course, getting very oversold on the technicals. So I think we're going to get a little bounce. I think that Friday put in some lows and tested some lows. And I think we're going to get a little bounce. Do I think it holds? I don't think so. I think we're going to come back on beans and corn. And I think corn's going to try the contract lows before it's done, maybe down to 207. and on the DEES contract. And I think that when we look at the November soybeans, I look for 443.5 to be tested. Now, if we get down there, that's a second count of a wave count that we do, and that's kind of important. A lot of times you'll go for 3, but you don't have to. And that also is a 7.86% retracement, which is 538 was a 7.86% retracement from last year's highs to this year's lows. And so the market is kind of acting in symmetry, but it is oversold for the moment. Even the Dow today I thought was very interesting. The Dow in the call options around the 86 calls were actually trading higher while the market was lower.
So we've seen some inverses here.
That's right. It can be an indication sometimes that you're close to a lift, that it shows market sentiment. And I think everybody was ready to say, you know, we've had a tough week. We're coming into another one. But, you know, it's Friday and we're in some uncertain times. So everybody's just trying to make sure they're careful with their money. But I really think the grain markets are acting very seasonal.
All right. And that seasonality would probably lend people who are harvesting maybe to go ahead and take the LDP at this point and hold the crop?
Well, I think if they're planning on LDPing, I think they maybe want to hang on for just a little bit. Now, food is going to be very important, but this is a war of a different kind, and I think that it's going to be more smoothed out. And, you know, the one thing we have to remember is even after Hurricane Andrew swept across Florida and wiped out thousands of homes, lumber broke for a little while before it finally caught and everybody got realistic and it turned around. Just today, the State Department did announce that they were, as of Monday, I think it is, they're going to drop sanctions against Pakistan and India. So that would be probably veg oil and wheat that will benefit from that. But I think we're going to see food is going to be a bargaining tool here, and I think that that's one thing we have to watch. Now, in the meantime, you've also got Europe letting loose of some stocks, emergency stocks that they've had. So that's probably why wheat's having a little trouble for the moment, but it'll also help us get bottomed. Technically, I could see where the wheat market might kill a little time here, bounce, and then come back and test these lows again. But all I can say is to stay focused on the wheat market, because the wheat producer's been through 4 years of this, tough times, to stay focused. Get some long-term charts, some monthly charts. Ask your broker for those monthly charts and take a look at them. We're building some phenomenal bases. And then to do some comparison studies, ask your broker also for a monthly oat chart, and it'll show you what's going to come in the wheat market, and it's all positive.
Okay, so some positive news there. Let's talk quickly. Cotton market again just continues under this pressure. Anything going to break that, or are we just building a base there?
Well, I think cotton's about spent its wad, I think, to the downside. It's overshot itself. The 34-cent area the last time I was on, I still thought cotton had some lows to come in, and it's done that. And I think now cotton's probably well priced. Not that we would like it as a producer, but unfortunately that's been the market. So I think it's done its thing, and now maybe the worst is over with. What more can you put in that market that's negative?
Let's talk about the cattle market, which has been a very positive market. Now this week we started to see futures soften up some, not so much on the cash side, but that is causing some concern out there for cattle feeders.
Well, they are, and the one thing that we have to be real concerned about, and it's been concerning us for some time, is all the heavyweight cattle that's been out there. And that's a sign of backing cattle up. You don't want to back cattle up under these times. And of course, before the tragic occurrence out in New York happened last week, the cattle market was in a little bit of trouble. I mean, the fat market peaked in the month of February, but it's dropped about $15. And that's a fair amount of drop for the cash market. So I think that we're probably hitting a low here, going to get a bounce. Feeders is the one market I'm more concerned about. Placements today on the Cattle on Feed report were down, maybe not as much as what some had thought, or they were down actually a little more than what some had expected. I think they were expecting 93%. We came out at 90. So it was a little more. That'll be helpful to February futures, that type of thing. But when you looked at the weight breakdowns, it was heavy cattle, heavy feeders that actually dropped the most, 17%. And I think with good pasture conditions, we're seeing feeders go out into the pastures. And of course, it's not a very profitable time, so I think it enhances, rather than putting them into the feedlots, put them out on wheat pasture. And I think that when we look at feeder cattle, I can't emphasize enough, we could get a bounce up to 88 cents on the October futures. Hedge them, get them locked up. I don't see good things. There's chart formations on these feeder cattle that does not look pretty.
All right, and the fed cattle market, what's your strategy there?
Well, in the fed cattle market, I think, stay current in your marketings. Even though these are bad prices, stay current. We're in uncertain times economically, and now with disruptions of usage. Even though people are staying home and they eat at home, they're going to be cooking and eating something. They're not eating the expensive cuts. And of course, that also coincides with an economic time, too, if you're going into recession. So I think that's been hurtful to us and, of course, very emotional. And that was the one high-price sector of the whole ag sector. So keep your cattle marketed. And I think we're going to get a bounce here in these fat cattle because I think they've had a $15 break, and that should behoove us to get something here. But November looks like we're going to pick up a lot more numbers again.
All right. Now, what about over in the hogs?
Well, in the hog market, of course, some of the pressure in hogs came along with sympathy of cattle, but hogs are not as overpriced. When I look at this and we're ramping up the military, they've got to buy something to feed their people, and I think pork and poultry is probably the first picks. And when you look at Canada, they have this weekend they've got a large packing house that is expected possibly to go on strike. If that does occur, then we're going to start to see some more numbers coming into the United States, which we don't need at this time. Product is a little soft. I look for cash to be a little softer yet this next week. I think I would be stepping up the thought process of doing some hedges. These are uncertain times. I'd certainly have puts under them, but puts are sort of expensive. I think I'd be buying futures and getting those shorts on against some production, and probably all the way in through February and April. On any bounce we get this next week, I'd start doing that. When I look at the hog market, the chart formation is almost very similar to the Dow and the S&Ps before they broke down.
Okay. Sue, on that note, thank you so much. That'll wrap up this edition of Market to Market. Now be sure to join us again next week as we continue to track the emerging changes to farm policy, commodity markets, and rural life. Until then, I'm Mark Pearson. Thanks for watching, and have a great week.
Market to Market is a production of Iowa Public Television, which is solely responsible for its content. Partial funding for this program is provided by the Central Educational Network. Major funding is provided by this and other public television stations, and
this program made possible in part by Pioneer Hybrid to help America's growers become more market-wise, because high yields plus sound marketing skills help our customers succeed.
and by Deere & Company on behalf of John Deere dealers.